The wind screamed across the open Montana plains, a merciless cry that seemed to pierce through every layer of wool and leather Jonas Reed wore. The sky was the color of tarnished steel, heavy with clouds that threatened more snow, and the land, beneath it, stretched endless and barren, broken only by clusters of scrub brush and the occasional wind-worn pine. Jonas tugged his hat lower over his brow and pulled his coat tighter around himself, the smell of horse sweat and frozen earth filling his senses. He'd been to town many times before, to trade hides, to fetch supplies, to sell a calf or two. But this ride was different. This time he wasn't going to town for business. This time he was going to meet his future. His hands were rough on the reins, calloused from years of mending fences, branding cattle, and swinging an axe. From sunup to sundown, 30 winters had carved lines into his face, and though he was still young by some standards, he felt older than most men twice his age. Out here, the land had a way of aging a soul faster than time itself. Jonas's heart beat hard beneath his worn sheepskin coat as he thought of Clara Mayhew, the woman he'd been writing to for nearly a year, the woman whose letters had become his only warmth during the long, bitter nights. He'd memorized every word she'd written. She described her small apartment in Boston, the way she worked in her aunt's dress shop, and how she longed for open skies and fresh air. She'd sent him a single photograph, a soft-featured girl with delicate shoulders, her hair swept neatly beneath a bonnet, her hands folded in her lap. She looked like something out of a painting, far too refined for a man like him, but she had chosen him, answered his newspaper ad, and agreed to travel across the country to become his wife. Jonas had dreamed of her in vivid detail. He imagined her laughter filling the empty cabin, her gentle voice humming as she worked beside him. He pictured her pale hands resting on his chest, her warmth a balm to years of loneliness. Every fence post he'd driven, every storm he'd weathered, every lonely meal by the fire had been made bearable by the thought that soon she would be there, turning his harsh world into something softer. He never could have imagined what awaited him when the stagecoach finally arrived. The town of Red Willow was little more than a collection of weather-beaten buildings clustered around a muddy main street, but to Jonas, it was a place of hope that day. The clatter of the stagecoach wheels echoed between the storefronts as it came to a stop outside the mercantile. Townsfolk bustled about, collars turned up against the cold, boots crunching on frozen slush. Men leaned on hitching posts to watch the arrival, and women gathered near the porch of the general store, whispering as the coach driver hollered for passengers to step down. Jonas's pulse quickened as he scanned the windows of the coach, searching for that delicate face he'd memorized. He straightened his coat and tried to brush the dust from his hat, nerves twisting in his stomach. But when the door of the stage swung open, the woman who climbed down was not the soft, fragile creature from the photograph. She was tall, taller than Jonas by an inch at least, and broad-shouldered with arms that looked like they could lift a sack of grain without effort. Her hair, a deep chestnut color, spilled out from beneath a plain bonnet, snowflakes clinging to its waves. She wore a heavy wool coat and carried a trunk so large Jonas wondered how she'd managed to get it onto the stage at all. Her steps were sure and strong, and when her sharp green eyes found his, Jonas felt as though she could see straight through him. "You Jonas Reed?" she asked, her voice steady and unflinching. Jonas blinked, his mouth dry. "I am," he managed. "Good," she said briskly, setting down the trunk with a thud. "Name's Eleanor, you can call me Nell." For a moment, Jonas thought he'd misheard. "Nell? That's right." She extended a gloved hand, her grip firm when he hesitantly shook it. "Clara's my cousin. She had a change of heart, so I came in her stead. Figured a man out here might need a woman who knows how to work." Jonas stood frozen, the words slamming into him like a sudden gust of wind. Clara wasn't coming. This towering woman with fierce eyes was supposed to be his bride. The murmurs of townsfolk reached his ears, whispers carried on the cold wind. "That's Reed's bride. Heard he was getting a pretty thing from back east. Guess he got something better, a woman who can split logs." Jonas's cheeks burned, but he said nothing. He simply nodded, picked up the other side of Nell's trunk, and helped Her loaded into his wagon. "We should get moving," she said matter-of-factly, climbing into the seat beside him. "Storm's coming." As they drove out of town, Jonas couldn't find words. The wagon wheels creaked over the frozen road, the horses snorting clouds of steam as snowflakes began to fall. Nell sat beside him, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. She wasn't beautiful in the delicate sense he'd imagined, but there was something striking about her. A raw strength, a confidence that seemed out of place in this lonely land. "I'm not what you expected, am I?" she said. Suddenly breaking the silence, Jonas gripped the reins tighter. "No," he admitted softly. "Didn't think so." She chuckled without humor. "Don't worry, I'm used to that." He glanced at her, wanting to ask why she'd come all this way if she knew she wasn't wanted. But the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he focused on the road ahead, his heart heavy with disappointment. The Reed Ranch was a humble spread, a small cabin surrounded by stretches of barren land, a few outbuildings for livestock, and fences Jonas had built with his own hands. As the wagon rattled into the yard, Nell surveyed the scene with a critical eye, her lips pursed. "Not much to look at," she said. "It's home," Jonas replied quietly. "Good thing I ain't picky," she said with a shrug. Jumping down from the wagon and hefting her trunk as though it weighed nothing, Jonas reached to help her, but she waved him off. Inside the cabin, a fire crackled weakly in the hearth. The place was clean, but sparse. A table, 2 chairs, a small bed in the corner, shelves stocked with basic supplies. Jonas felt suddenly self-conscious, wishing he'd done more to make it welcoming for Clara. Or, he supposed now, for Nell. Nell set her trunk down with a heavy thud, dusted off her hands, and immediately set to work. "You got any food in this place?" "Some beans, jerky." "Lord help us," she muttered, rolling up her sleeves. "Sit down, Mr. Reed. I'll make us a meal." That night, Jonas watched in stunned silence as Nell transformed his meager pantry into a hearty stew, her hands moving with practiced ease. She hummed softly under her breath, the sound warm and low. When she placed a steaming bowl in front of him, he mumbled his thanks, feeling awkward in his own home. "You're disappointed," she said suddenly, not looking up from her own bowl. Jonas hesitated, unsure how to respond. "It's fine. I ain't offended." She met his gaze, her green eyes steady. "You were expecting a girl like Clara, sweet, soft, pretty as a picture. I ain't that, but I'm here. I came all this way and I ain't about to turn around. So, maybe we can make something of this." Jonas studied her face, noticing for the first time the faint lines of exhaustion beneath her strength, the guarded look in her eyes. There was more to her than boldness, something hidden, something she wasn't ready to share. "Maybe," he said quietly. Nell gave a small smile and went back to eating, as if that settled it. Outside, the prairie was silent except for the distant howl of a coyote. But not far from the cabin, another pair of eyes watched from the shadows. Coyote McGraw crouched low, his rifle slung over his back, his partner, a wiry man with a scarred neck, beside him. McGraw had been following Jonas Reed for weeks, waiting for the right moment to strike. "He's got himself a woman now," McGraw whispered, his voice like gravel. "Could be useful." The scarred man grinned. "Make it easier to break him." McGraw's eyes narrowed on the flickering light of the cabin. "We'll wait, see what he does. Then we take what's ours." Over the next few days, Jonas and Nell settled into a fragile routine. She worked hard, mending fences, splitting firewood, feeding livestock with a strength that left Jonas quietly impressed. He had expected to be the one protecting and providing for her, but instead, she seemed to thrive in the harshness of the land. Still, he couldn't shake his disappointment. Every time he looked at her, he remembered the delicate handwriting in Clara's letters, the photograph he'd carried in his pocket like a treasure. Nell was not that woman, but she was becoming something else entirely. One evening, as Jonas returned from checking the livestock, he found Nell standing outside, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The setting sun painted the sky in streaks of orange and purple, but her face was tense, her jaw clenched. "You're running from something," Jonas said quietly. Her eyes flicked to his, sharp as a blade. "And you're not?" Jonas had no reply. That night, the storm finally broke. Wind rattled the windows, snow whipped against the walls, and Jonas and Nell huddled by the fire, the air thick with unspoken words. He was just beginning to drift into uneasy sleep when a sharp crack shattered the silence. Gunfire. The window exploded, glass spraying across the room. Nell was on her feet in an instant, grabbing Jonas's shotgun from above the door. "Get down," she barked, shoving him behind the table as another bullet tore through the wall. Jonas's heart pounded in his chest. He reached for his rifle, fumbling with the chamber as shadows moved outside. Nell crouched beside the window, her expression cold and focused, and fired a shot into the darkness. A scream echoed back. "You shoot like you've done this before," Jonas said breathlessly. Nell didn't answer, her eyes scanning the yard with deadly calm. Bullets ripped through the cabin walls, smoke filling the air. Jonas crouched lower, realizing that the woman he'd thought of as a mistake, the woman who wasn't supposed to be here, might be the only reason he'd lived through this night. And as the gunfight raged, Jonas Reed understood that nothing about his life was going to be simple ever again. The night air reeked of gunpowder and smoke. Jonas Reed's cabin, humble and weather-beaten, was suddenly transformed into a battlefield. Bullets slammed through the thin wooden walls, splintering planks and rattling dishes off their shelves. The fire in the hearth flared from the gusts of cold air bursting through shattered windows. Jonas crouched low behind the heavy oak table, his heart pounding like a runaway horse. Nell knelt beside him, shotgun braced tight against her shoulder, her expression unflinching. Her green eyes, sharp and calculating, flicked between the shadows beyond the window. There was no trace of fear on her face. She moved with precision, the kind of confidence born from experience, not luck. "Keep your head down," she hissed, her voice calm despite the chaos. "Who are they?" Jonas whispered, fumbling with his rifle as adrenaline made his hands shake. "Don't know yet," she said, "but they ain't here for a friendly visit." Another shot cracked through the dark, splintering the doorframe inches from Jonas's head. Nell's response was immediate. She swung the barrel of the shotgun toward the flash of movement outside and fired. The deafening boom echoed through the cabin, followed by a curse from the yard. "Got one," she muttered, already reaching for more shells. Jonas blinked at her, stunned by how naturally she handled herself. She loaded and fired with the precision of a seasoned gunslinger, her broad shoulders steady under the recoil. She wasn't panicked, wasn't frantic. She was focused, like a woman who had lived through worse nights than this one. "There's 3 of them, maybe 4, she said calmly, ducking to reload. "You any good with that rifle, Mr. Reed?" Jonas swallowed hard and nodded. "Good enough. Then let's show 'em they picked the wrong ranch." Chaos outside the attackers weren't hiding their intentions. Their voices carried over the wind, rough, slurred with whiskey, filled with cruelty. "Come on out, Reed," one of them hollered. "You and that lady of yours. We ain't gonna kill you quick if you make us come in." Nell's lips curled into a grim smile as she reloaded. "Sounds like McGraw's kind of talk." "McGraw?" Jonas asked, crouching lower. "Coyote McGraw. Outlaw. Meaner than a snake, uglier too. Bounty on his head big enough to buy a ranch twice this size." She peered through a crack in the window, scanning for movement. "Guess we know why he's here." Jonas's blood ran cold. McGraw. He'd heard stories, robberies, raids, and killings that left towns in ashes. But why here? Why him? Before he could ask, a lantern crashed through the window, flames spilling across the cabin floor. Jonas scrambled to his feet, stomping it out with his boots, while Nell kept firing. "They're trying to burn us out," he yelled. "Then let's make him regret it." She grabbed a second shotgun from the rack above the door, tossing it to him. "Keep their heads down while I flank 'em," she ordered, her voice steady. Jonas froze. "Flank 'em? You can't go out there alone." "Watch me," she said, her eyes glinting. "Keep 'em busy, Mr. Reed." Before Jonas could protest, Nell slipped out the back door, silent as a shadow despite her size. Nell in the dark. Cold hit her like a hammer as she crouched low in the snow, the wind whipping her hair around her face. She moved quickly, her boots crunching softly on the frozen ground. Nell wasn't just brave. She was strategic. She'd been in gunfights before, too many times to count, and she knew how to use the darkness to her advantage. The outlaws were clustered near the corral, their silhouettes faint against the glow of the moon. She could see McGraw among them, his wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his scarred face. He barked orders at his men, his voice carrying over the storm. Nell's heart hammered, but not with fear. This was familiar, the kind of danger she'd lived through long before Jonas Reed's letters had tempted her to the frontier. She moved like a predator, circling wide, her shotgun cradled in her arms. She waited until McGraw's men shifted closer to the cabin, then fired. Her first shot caught one of them in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground with a scream. The second outlaw spun, cursing as Jonas's rifle cracked from inside the cabin. McGraw dove for cover, snarling. "She's out here," he roared. "Spread out, boys." Nell ducked behind a haystack, breath puffing in sharp bursts as she reloaded. Jonas's perspective inside the cabin. Jonas's fear was a living thing clawing at his chest. He wasn't used to being hunted like this, bullets whistling through the air around him. He crouched behind the overturned table, firing blindly through the window, hoping to keep the outlaws focused on him. "Come on, Nell," he muttered under his breath. "Come back in one piece." He didn't understand her. He didn't understand why she'd come all this way, why she was willing to risk her life for him when she didn't even know him. But watching her move with such skill and ferocity stirred something deep in him, a mix of fear, admiration, and something else he wasn't ready to name. The night exploded with gunfire. Jonas flinched as a bullet splintered the edge of the table, grazing his arm. Pain burned down his forearm, warm blood soaking into his sleeve. He bit back a curse and fired again. Nell strikes back. Nell moved like a ghost through the shadows. She was no delicate mail-order bride. She was a fighter, hardened by a past she didn't talk about. "Reed's bleedin'," one outlaw yelled. "Good," McGraw snarled. "Keep firing." Nell used their distraction to her advantage. She crept closer, raising her shotgun. Her next shot hit the man nearest McGraw square in the back, dropping him in the snow. "Damn it," McGraw roared, spinning toward her. Their eyes met across the yard, his filled with rage, hers with cold defiance. She fired again, and McGraw dove for cover, bullets tearing through the night as his men scrambled. Nell's movements were swift and calculated, each shot forcing the gang to retreat farther from the cabin. "Reed," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Cover me." Jonas leaned out the shattered window, firing at a shadowy figure. His shot missed, but it bought her a few precious seconds. She darted toward the barn, hoping to use its cover to push closer. The standoff, the gunfight stretched on, minutes feeling like hours. The snow thickened, turning the yard into a swirling haze. Jonas's arm throbbed, his breath ragged, but he kept shooting. Finally, McGraw let out a sharp whistle, signaling his men. "Fall back," he barked. Jonas peeked out the window in disbelief. The outlaws were retreating, melting into the storm. McGraw lingered at the edge of the yard, his dark silhouette framed by the snow. "This ain't over, Reed," he shouted. "You hear me? This is just the start." Nell stepped out from behind the barn, her shotgun aimed steady. "You best keep riding, McGraw," she called. "Next time I won't miss." McGraw spat in the snow and vanished into the night. Aftermath. The silence that followed was deafening. Jonas sagged against the wall, his rifle slipping from his hands. He was shaking, adrenaline flooding his veins. Nell strode back into the cabin, her expression unreadable. She set her shotgun on the table and knelt beside him, inspecting his wound with surprisingly gentle hands. "It's just a graze," she murmured. "You'll live." Jonas winced as she cleaned the cut, her fingers steady. "Who are you, Nell?" he asked softly. Her lips twitched into a wry smile. "Someone who's seen worse." "You knew McGraw." "Everyone out west knows McGraw," she said, avoiding his gaze. "He's a rabid dog. Once he's got a taste for blood, he won't stop." Jonas swallowed hard. "Why me?" Nell's eyes finally met his, a flicker of something. Regret? Guilt? Passing through them. Maybe it ain't you he's after, she said quietly. Maybe it's me. Emotional tension, Jonas stared at her, stunned. Nell stood, pacing the cabin. The flickering firelight cast shadows across her face, softening her hard features. You've got secrets, he said. And you don't? She shot back, her voice sharp. He didn't answer. She sighed, leaning against the wall. Look, I came, here for a fresh start. Figured marrying a rancher in the middle of nowhere might give me that. Guess I was wrong. Jonas's heart ached at the weariness in her voice. He had been so fixated on what she wasn't, on the delicate woman he'd imagined, that he hadn't seen the strength it had taken for her to come here at all. Maybe we can still make something of this, he said softly. Nell's eyes flicked to him, surprised. She studied him for a long moment, then gave a small, sad smile. Maybe. Foreshadowing danger outside, the snowstorm covered the blood and bullet casings, erasing the signs of battle. But danger still lurked beyond the horizon. McGraw wouldn't forget this night, and neither would Jonas or Nell. In the quiet of the cabin, as the fire crackled and the storm howled, Jonas realized two things. First, that the woman he'd thought of as a mistake might be the only reason he was still alive. And second, that whatever past she was running from had just found them both. Closing beat for part 2 hours later, Jonas lay awake on his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling as snow drifted softly outside. Nell sat by the fire, sharpening her knife with steady strokes. Her face was calm, but her eyes were distant, haunted. Jonas wanted to ask about her past, about McGraw, about why she was so skilled with a gun. But he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he closed his eyes and tried to ignore the gnawing fear in his gut. He had invited a stranger into his life, and now his quiet existence was unraveling. He didn't know if he'd survive this winter, but as he drifted into uneasy sleep, he couldn't help but feel that for the first time in years, he wasn't entirely alone. Dawn after the gunfight. The first light of dawn crept across the Montana plains like a shy intruder, timid and pale against the carnage of the night before. Jonas Reed stood outside his cabin, breath steaming in the freezing air, his rifle still clutched loosely in one hand. The snowstorm had passed, leaving a glittering white blanket that sparkled beneath the rising sun. But the peace it offered felt hollow. Bullet holes scarred the cabin walls, shattered glass littered the porch, and dark stains of blood marred the pristine snow where the outlaws had fallen. The land looked almost beautiful in the cold morning light. Too beautiful for what had happened here. Jonas had seen death before, but never like this. Never in his own yard. Never while standing shoulder to shoulder with a woman he barely knew. Inside, Nell moved with quiet efficiency, cleaning and reloading weapons, her face expressionless. She had barely slept. Jonas had woken more than once in the night to find her sitting by the fire, sharpening her knife with slow, deliberate strokes, her gaze far away. Jonas leaned against the porch railing, exhausted. His left arm was bandaged, throbbing from the graze he'd taken, but his thoughts were too restless for pain to take root. He glanced back through the open doorway, watching Nell as she tied her hair back with a leather cord, her sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms marked by old scars. There was a steadiness to her. Not bravado, not bluster, just quiet strength. She was like no woman he'd ever met. He had been a fool, he realized. He'd spent months dreaming of a delicate beauty who would soften his world, someone who'd need him to protect her, someone who'd look at him with admiration. Instead, he'd been sent a woman who could handle herself better than most men, a woman whose past was clearly as rough and scarred as his own. And somehow, he was starting to feel like he'd gotten the better end of the bargain. Sheriff Hargrove arrives. The distant sound of hooves drew Jonas's attention. He squinted against the morning sun, spotting a lone rider approaching through the snow. The man sat tall in the saddle, a duster flapping behind him, a badge glinting on his chest. Sheriff Silas Hargrove was a broad-shouldered man with gray in his beard and a face weathered by decades of frontier justice. He carried himself with The calm authority of someone who'd seen too much and survived it all. Heard gunfire all the way in town. Hargrove called out as he dismounted, his boots crunching in the snow. What in God's name happened here, Reed? Jonas straightened, his grip tightening on the rifle. McGraw, he said simply. Hargrove's expression hardened. Coyote McGraw? That's what Nell called him. Jonas gestured toward the cabin. She knew him. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Knew him, huh? Well, ain't that something? Nell stepped out onto the porch, a rifle slung. Over her shoulder, she didn't flinch under Hargrove's scrutiny. Mornin', Sheriff, she said evenly. Ma'am, he said with a curt nod. Mind telling me why McGraw was shooting up Reed's place? That bastard don't usually waste bullets on nobodies. Nell's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Figured as much, Hargrove muttered. He turned back to Jonas. He's got a reason, Reed. McGraw don't move unless there's something in it for him. You getting mixed up in something I should know about? Jonas bristled. I keep to myself. Always have. Hargrove's gaze shifted back to Nell. And you, Miss Nell, was it? Nell will do. Mind explaining why a woman I've never seen before shoots straighter than half the men in this county and just happens to know the most dangerous outlaw west of the Missouri? Nell's lips curved into a humorless smile. Maybe I'm just full of surprises. The sheriff studied her for a long moment, then spat in the snow. You're something, all right. McGraw's calling card. Hargrove crouched near the barn, inspecting footprints and blood trails. He returned holding something small in his gloved hand, a silver coin with a wolf's head etched into its surface. McGraw's calling card, he said grimly, handing it to Jonas. He leaves one at every place he plans on coming back to. Jonas's stomach sank. You're saying he'll come again? Count on it, Hargrove said, his tone flat. Man like McGraw don't. Like being run off makes him look weak. Nell crossed her arms, her face unreadable. Then we make sure he don't get the chance. Easy, miss, the sheriff said. This ain't your fight. Her eyes snapped to his, fierce and unyielding. The hell it ain't. He came here looking for me. Both men stared at her. You, Jonas said softly. Nell didn't deny it. Nell's secret begins to unravel. She stepped off the porch, pacing in the snow. McGraw and I might have crossed paths a few years back, she said finally, her voice low. I was traveling with a wagon train heading west. He and his gang raided us outside of Cheyenne. Most of us didn't make it out. Her jaw clenched as memories flickered across her face. He took something from me. Something I've been hunting him for ever since. Jonas watched her carefully. And now he's hunting you. Nell nodded. Guess he don't like being chased. Hargrove let out a long sigh. You two are sitting ducks out here. McGraw's got near a dozen men riding with him, and he won't stop till he gets what he wants. What does he want? Jonas asked. Nell's gaze dropped. Me, she said simply. Tension builds. Jonas felt a surge of anger he couldn't quite explain. Anger at McGraw for bringing this danger to his doorstep, and anger at himself for feeling protective over a woman he barely knew. Nell wasn't helpless, far from it. But that didn't stop his chest from tightening at the thought of her in McGraw's hands. We can't just sit here and wait, Jonas said, glancing between them. We need a plan. Hargrove rubbed, his beard deep in thought. McGraw'll come back sure as the sunrise. Best thing you two can do is get out of here for a spell. I'll put word out in town, rally some men. Maybe set a trap. Nell shook her head sharply. If we run, he'll burn this place to the ground. He'll take your cattle, your land, everything. He won't stop till he's satisfied. Jonas looked at her, startled by the fire in her voice. We stand our ground, she said firmly. He wants me? Fine. Let him come. Emotional connection deepens later that day. After the sheriff rode back to town, Jonas found himself repairing the cabin windows, hammering boards over the shattered panes. Nell worked beside him, her movements efficient, her expression calm, but he could sense the tension simmering beneath her surface. You don't have to stay, he said quietly as he handed her a plank. She paused, her green eyes meeting his. You want me to leave? No, he said quickly, surprising himself with how certain he was. "But I don't want you getting killed on account of me." She gave a soft laugh, bitter but warm. "Jonas Reed, you're about the only reason I ain't already dead, so don't go thinking this is about you." He studied her, trying to read the woman behind the toughness. "You're not what I expected?" "Good," she said, hammering another board into place. "Expectations will kill a man faster than a bullet." Jonas chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You talk like someone twice your age. Been through enough to earn it." There was a pause between them, heavy with unspoken words. Jonas wanted to ask about her past, about the wagon train, about what McGraw had taken from her. But he didn't push. Not yet. Instead, he handed her another nail, their fingers brushing briefly. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. A warning in the dark that night, the wind howled again, rattling the patched windows. Jonas and Nell sat by the fire, their weapons close at hand. They'd finished supper in silence, the tension between them thick but not hostile. More like two people standing at the edge of something neither dared name. Jonas leaned back in his chair, exhaustion pulling at him. "Sheriff thinks McGraw'll come in a few days." Nell's gaze stayed on the fire. "He'll come sooner." "How do you know?" She turned her head, her eyes glinting in the firelight. "Because that's what I'd do." Jonas shivered, at the certainty in her voice. Suddenly, the horses outside snorted and stamped, their unease cutting through the night. Jonas was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Nell followed, her shotgun ready. He opened the door cautiously, peering into the darkness. The yard was still, the snow glistening under a thin sliver of moonlight, but something was wrong. Nell moved ahead of him, her gaze sweeping the shadows. And then Jonas saw it. A wooden stake driven into the ground at the edge of the yard, a strip of leather tied to it. He stepped closer, his stomach twisting. Carved into the leather was a crude image of a wolf's head, its fangs bared. "He's close," Nell murmured, her voice low. Jonas's pulse thundered in his ears, cliffhanger ending for part 3. A distant howl rose on the wind, chilling Jonas to the bone. It wasn't a coyote. It was a man, mocking them, taunting them. Nell raised her shotgun, her jaw tight. "He's letting us know," she said. "He's here." Jonas felt the weight of the rifle in his hands, the gravity of what lay ahead pressing down on him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. McGraw wasn't going to stop until one of them was dead. And in that moment, Jonas realized he'd do whatever it took to make sure it wasn't Nell. The howl echoed again, closer this time. The hunt had begun. Secrets in the snow. Blood on the wind. The days following the attack were swallowed in a cold silence, the kind that seeps into a man's bones and makes him question the shape of his own shadow. The Reed cabin stood battered but upright, its windows patched with canvas and wood scraps, its walls pocked with bullet holes that whispered reminders of the violence that had erupted there. Jonas spent hours hammering boards, hauling wood, and tending to the livestock, but none of it kept his mind from circling back to the same haunting image. Nell, standing barefoot in the glow of lantern light, her eyes hard as steel as she leveled that shotgun at the men outside. He'd thought he understood women, or at least understood the quiet desperation that led a stranger to answer a mail-order ad. But Nell Reed, or was she even truly Nell Reed, was no ordinary woman. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd stared death in the eye and dared him to blink first. Every movement, every choice she made seemed deliberate, like she'd spent a lifetime anticipating danger. Jonas found himself both unnerved and captivated by her. Nights were the hardest. The howling wind outside the cabin carried with it the echo of gunfire, and Jonas would wake in a sweat, clutching at the rifle he kept near his bed. Yet no matter how many times he jolted, awake Nell was always there, her steady breathing a strange comfort in the darkness. They had taken to sharing the narrow bed, though neither spoke of it. Necessity had pushed them close together, but proximity had birthed something else, a quiet, unspoken connection that unsettled Jonas more than he cared to admit. The sheriff's warning 3 days after the attack, Sheriff Hargrove rode out to the ranch, his hat dusted with snow and his expression grim. Jonas met him at the porch, pulling his coat tighter against the bitter wind. "You were right to send word," the sheriff said, dismounting with a heavy grunt. "We tracked McGraw's gang through the foothills. They're on the move, meaner than ever." Jonas's jaw tightened. "What do they want with me? I ain't got cattle worth stealing, and the bank knows I'm too broke to rob." The sheriff spat into the snow, his eyes narrowing. "It ain't about cattle or cash. McGraw's been stirring up trouble for months, and he's taken a liking to making examples out of folks. Maybe he heard you got yourself a wife. Maybe he just wants to watch the world burn. Either way, son, you best keep your gun close and your wits closer." Nell stepped out onto the porch then, her hands on her hips, her expression unreadable. "We can handle ourselves," she said, her voice calm but firm. The sheriff studied her for a long moment, his eyes flicking over the scar on her forearm, the confident stance. "I reckon you can," he said finally, though his tone carried a note of curiosity. "You're no stranger to trouble, are you, Mrs. Reed?" "None of your concern," she replied coolly. Hargrove gave a low chuckle. "Fair enough." He turned back to Jonas. "Watch your back, Reed. McGraw's got men hiding in these hills, and he ain't the forgiving type. You shoot first if it comes to it, you hear?" Jonas nodded, though unease coiled in his gut like a rattlesnake. Nell's confession. That night, as the snow fell thick and heavy, Nell sat by the fire mending a torn shirt with hands that didn't shake. Jonas watched her in silence, trying to piece together the puzzle of her life. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "You knew how to shoot like that," he said. "Not just shoot, you fought like you'd done it before. Who taught you?" Nell didn't look up. "My father," she said after a pause. "He wasn't a kind man. Raised me like a son. Taught me to fight, to ride, to aim straight. Said a woman in this world wouldn't survive on charm alone." Jonas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "And McGraw? You know him?" This time she did look at him, her green eyes flickering with something sharp. "I know men like him. Men who think they own the world, who take whatever they please. I spent years running from one of those men. Thought maybe out here I'd find peace." Jonas's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to ask more, to know the details of the life she'd fled, but something in her expression warned him to stop. Instead, he reached for her hand. Her fingers were calloused, strong. "You're safe here," he said softly, though even as the words left his lips, he doubted them. Nell didn't pull away. "No one's ever truly safe," she murmured. Building tension, whispers in the dark. The next morning they found hoofprints in the snow near the chicken coop, too many for a single rider. Jonas's stomach knotted as he crouched to inspect them. "They were here," he said, his voice tight. "Watching us." Nell's face hardened. "Then they'll come again. And next time, they won't just watch." They doubled their efforts to prepare. Jonas spent hours fortifying the cabin, setting traps along the property line. Nell kept her shotgun close, her sharp eyes scanning the tree line every few minutes. But fear had a way of creeping in, no matter how hard they worked. At night, Jonas found himself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long they could survive like this. Every creak of the wind, every groan of the cabin made his pulse race. Yet amid the tension, something unexpected bloomed between them. Nell's laughter, rare and soft, warmed the cabin like a second fire. Jonas found himself watching her more than he should, studying the way her hair curled against her neck, the way her strength didn't diminish her femininity but deepened it. She was unlike any woman he'd known, and despite the danger pressing in from all sides, his heart betrayed him. Outlaw counsel. McGraw's plan, miles away, in a cabin deep in the hills, Coyote McGraw sat at a table littered with whiskey bottles and maps. His scarred face twisted into a grin as he spoke to his men. "Reed's a fool," he sneered. "Thinks he can hide behind that patched-up cabin. We'll hit him when he least expects it. And his new wife." His grin widened, cruel and hungry. "She's got fire in her. I like that. We'll see how much fire she's got left when I'm done with her." The men around him chuckled darkly. McGraw's second in command, a wiry man named Skeeter, leaned forward. "What's the play, boss?" "Simple. McGraw said, slamming his fist on the table. We smoke 'em out. Burn that ranch to the ground. Take what's ours. The room erupted in laughter, but McGraw's eyes burned with cold intent. Turning, point. A kiss in the storm. 2 nights later, a blizzard swept across the plains. The kind of storm that swallowed the world whole. Jonas and Nell huddled near the fire, their breath visible in the icy air despite the roaring flames. We'll get through this, Jonas said, his voice thick with exhaustion. Nell looked at him, her expression softening for the first time since she'd arrived. You really believe that? I have to, he said simply. For a moment silence hung between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Then without warning, Nell leaned forward and kissed him. It was fierce and unexpected, tasting of smoke and desperation. But Jonas kissed her back, his hands cupping her face as if she might vanish if he let go. When they pulled apart, she whispered, I didn't come here for love. But I think maybe it found me anyway. Jonas's heart pounded in his chest, but before he could respond, a sound outside shattered the fragile peace. The crack of a rifle. Cliffhanger. Fire in the night, Jonas grabbed his gun and pushed Nell behind him as the smell of smoke filled the air. Through the cracks in the cabin walls, an orange glow flickered. Fire. They're here, Nell hissed, already loading her shotgun. Jonas threw open the door and froze. Torches lit the night like hellfire and figures moved in the snow, their faces shadowed by hats and scarves. McGraw's gang had come and they were ready to burn the world down. Nell, Jonas whispered, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. Stay low. Shoot straight. She nodded, her eyes blazing. The first shot rang out, echoing through the frozen night. The night the earth caught fire, the night exploded in chaos. Flames licked the darkness, curling up from torches thrown into dry snowbanks, their glow reflecting off the pale drifts and bathing the ranch in an unholy orange light. Jonas's heart thundered as he shoved the cabin door shut, barring it with a thick beam of oak he'd cut weeks prior. Outside, McGraw's gang whooped and hollered like devils come to collect a soul, their voices echoing through the cold night air. Inside, the cabin trembled with tension. Nell stood by the window, her shotgun cradled in her hands, her face carved from stone. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't even breathing heavily. Jonas stole a glance at her, and for a moment, amidst the panic, a strange sense of calm washed over him. She looked like a warrior queen from some forgotten age, fierce, commanding, and absolutely unafraid. They'll try the roof, she murmured, her eyes narrowing. Watch the windows. Jonas nodded, rechecking his rifle. His palms were slick with sweat despite the bitter chill that seeped through the cabin walls. He crouched low, peering out a crack in the boards, catching glimpses of shadows darting among the torches. McGraw's men were circling them like wolves around a wounded deer. And then, with a roar, the first shot rang out. The siege begins. A bullet splintered the window frame near Jonas's head, spraying him with shards of wood. He ducked instinctively, swearing under his breath. Nell fired back without hesitation, the blast of her shotgun deafening in the tight space. One of the gangsters outside yelped in pain and a shadow collapsed into the snow. They weren't here to scare him anymore. This was a kill or be killed night. Torches began landing against the outer walls, and Jonas's stomach clenched. The boards were damp from snow, but fire was fire, and if they lost the cabin, they'd lose everything. I'll put out the flames, Jonas whispered, but Nell grabbed his arm with surprising strength. You step outside, they'll cut you down. Her voice was low but sharp as steel. We can't let them burn us alive, Nell, he hissed back. She met his eyes, and for a moment Jonas saw something flicker there, a mixture of fear and something else, something softer. Then we fight smarter, she said, releasing him. Keep shooting, I'll cover you. Jonas finds his courage. Jonas wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a gunslinger. He was a rancher with a busted fence, 6 cows, and a dream he'd barely managed to hold on to. But tonight, staring out into the firelit chaos, he realized something had shifted deep in his gut. Fear was still there, sharp and electric, but underneath it simmered a new resolve. Nell had come here to start over. just as he had. They were two broken souls clawing for peace, and he'd be damned if he let McGraw take that away. He steadied. His rifle took aim at a shadow creeping toward the side of the cabin and fired. The man dropped silently into the snow. Jonas didn't have time to think about what he'd done. Adrenaline roared through him as he reloaded, moved to another window and fired again. Nell's voice cut through the noise. "Left side, they're flanking!" Jonas whipped around just in time to see a figure scaling the porch rail. Nell fired and the man tumbled backward into the snow, but there were more behind him. Their whoops and hollers filled the night. A terrifying chorus of violence. "We need to move," Jonas shouted, his voice hoarse. Nell shook her head. "Not yet. We hold." McGraw steps into the light. A whistle pierced the chaos. A sharp, commanding sound that made the gunfire pause for a breath. Through the flames and smoke, Jonas spotted him at last. Coyote McGraw. The outlaw leader stood tall and broad-shouldered, a long duster coat billowing in the wind, his scarred face twisted into a cruel grin. He didn't look like a man. He looked like something born of legend and nightmare, his shadow stretching long in the torchlight. "Reed," McGraw's voice carried across the clearing like a whip crack. "You got guts, boy, I'll give you that. But guts don't save you from what's coming." Jonas gritted his teeth, his rifle aimed but finger frozen. McGraw took a slow step forward. "Send that woman out and maybe I'll let you live. She's wasted on you anyhow." Nell's laugh, sharp and bitter, rang out through the night. "You'd have to kill me first." McGraw chuckled darkly. "That can be arranged, darlin'." Jonas's hands trembled, but not with fear anymore. Something inside him snapped at the sound of McGraw's taunting voice. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for her. Close quarters chaos, the outlaws rushed the porch in a sudden, brutal charge. Jonas barely had time to reload before the door rattled on its hinges, the wooden beam holding it in, place groaning under the strain. Nell swung her shotgun like a club, smashing the window with its stock to fire point blank at a man trying to climb through. Blood spattered the sill as he fell backward. "They're coming in," Jonas shouted, grabbing an axe from the corner. The door gave way with a deafening crack and the first man barreled through. Jonas met him head-on, swinging the axe's blunt end into his stomach. The man crumpled, but another was right behind him, tackling Jonas to the floor. The rifle slipped from his hand, skittering across the room. Nell roared, a sound Jonas would never forget, and charged, slamming her shoulder into the man pinning Jonas. He went sprawling and Nell fired her shotgun at point-blank range, the blast nearly deafening him. "Up!" she barked, hauling him to his feet. Blood stained the wooden floor, mingling with melting snow from boots and coats. The cabin smelled of gunpowder, sweat, and fear. Jonas's head spun, but his grip on the axe tightened. Fire takes hold. Smoke thickened in the air, curling in through the shattered windows. Jonas coughed, blinking through the haze, and his stomach dropped. One side of the cabin was ablaze. Flames climbed the wall like greedy fingers, crackling and popping as they devoured the old wood. "We're burning," he shouted. Nell didn't falter. "Then we take as many of them with us as we can." Her voice was like steel, like a battle cry from another lifetime. Jonas found himself emboldened by it, his fear burning away in the firelight. He grabbed his rifle, firing at shadows moving beyond the doorway while Nell reloaded with lightning speed, her jaw set in grim determination. Outside, McGraw's men were regrouping, their laughter turning to shouts of alarm as the fire threatened to spiral out of control. Jonas caught glimpses of them retreating, not because they feared him, but because the cabin was becoming a blazing trap. "We can't stay," Jonas yelled over the roar of the flames. Nell's eyes blazed as she met his. "Then we run. Together." Cliffhanger. The leap into darkness. Jonas kicked open the back door, the cold night air rushing in like a savior. The flames roared behind them, and through the smoke Jonas saw McGraw standing just beyond the tree line, his grin wicked even in retreat. "You can't run forever, boy," McGraw shouted. "I'll have her one way or another." Nell fired a shot in his direction, forcing him to dive for cover. "Move!" she screamed, grabbing Jonas's hand. They bolted into the snow, the fire lighting the world behind them. Bullets whizzed past their heads as they ran, breathless and desperate, into the dark wilderness. Jonas's lungs burned, his boots sinking deep into the drifts, but he didn't let go of her hand. Not for a second. Behind them, the ranch burned, like a beacon, a blazing symbol of everything they'd lost. Ahead of them lay only darkness, cold, and the promise of more blood. But as they vanished into the trees, Jonas realized something terrifying and undeniable. He wasn't just running for his life anymore. He was running for hers. Jonas's breath came ragged in the icy night, every exhale a cloud of steam torn away by the wind. Branches lashed at his face, snow crunched underfoot, and his chest heaved with exhaustion. But he didn't dare stop, not while the glow of his burning ranch still flickered behind them like a dying star. Nell ran beside him, her grip on his hand iron strong, pulling him along through the labyrinth of trees with the instincts of someone who'd spent a lifetime running from danger. Somewhere behind them, voices rang out, shouts and curses, punctuated by gunfire that echoed like thunder through the valley. McGraw's men were spreading out, their lanterns bobbing through the darkness, hunting like wolves. Jonas risked a glance over his shoulder, and his stomach clenched. The fire from his cabin still lit the sky, but beyond it, dark figures moved swiftly through the snow, their torches and guns catching flashes of moonlight. They were closing in. "We can't outrun them forever," Jonas gasped, his voice ragged. "I'm not planning to," Nell muttered, not slowing her pace. Her words sent a chill deeper than the night air through him. She wasn't scared. She was calculating every step, purposeful. She was leading him somewhere. A pause in the dark. They broke through a thicket and stumbled into a small clearing, the moonlight spilling silver over the snow like spilled milk. Jonas doubled over, hands on his knees, gasping for air, his legs trembling from exhaustion. Nell crouched low, her back to a tree, scanning the shadows. "Rest," she ordered softly, "just for a moment." Jonas collapsed onto a fallen log, his body aching and lungs burning. The forest around them was alive with distant sounds, the whisper of wind through branches, the faint crack of twigs from movement far off, the eerie cry of an owl somewhere overhead. But beneath it all was something worse. Silence, stretching, taut like a bowstring. The gang wasn't far. He could feel it in his bones. Nell knelt beside him, her breath puffing in soft clouds. In the pale light, her face was streaked with soot, her jaw tight, her eyes sharp and unyielding, yet there was a flicker of something softer there now, a warmth he hadn't seen before. "You saved me back there," Jonas said quietly, his voice hoarse. She looked at him, surprised. "You're the one who stood your ground." "I ain't. Never shot a man before tonight," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. His hands were still trembling. "Felt like, I don't even know. Like I ain't myself anymore." Nell's gaze softened. She reached out and placed a calloused, steady hand on his shoulder. "You are yourself," she said firmly. "You're alive because of it. Don't you forget that." Jonas swallowed hard, meeting her eyes. Something passed between them then. A quiet understanding, forged in fire and blood. Memories and ghosts, the cold pressed in around them, seeping through their coats. Jonas pulled his blanket from his pack, offering it to her. But she shook her head. "Keep it. You're already shivering," she said, settling against the tree. He hesitated, then wrapped it around himself, watching her as she scanned the woods, always alert, always listening. For a moment he saw the woman beneath the iron exterior, the curve of her jaw, the strands of hair matted with snow, the quiet determination etched into her every feature. "You've done this before," he murmured. "Done what?" "Run like this, fight like this." Nell's expression hardened, and for a long moment she didn't answer. Then she said, "I've been hunted before. McGraw's not the first man who wanted me dead." Jonas's breath caught. "Why?" Her eyes flicked to him, guarded but tired. "Because I said no." The words were soft, but they cut deep. Jonas's heart ached at the weight in her voice, at the shadows in her eyes. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. All he could do was sit there, clutching the blanket tight, feeling a slow, simmering anger rise within him, not at her but at the world that had made her this way. "You don't deserve this," he finally whispered. Nell's lips curved into a bitter smile. "Deserve's got nothing to do with it, rancher. The bow." Sound of death. A branch snapped somewhere in the distance, sharp and sudden. Both of them froze. Nell's hand was on her shotgun in an instant, her eyes scanning the tree line. Jonas's heart slammed against his ribs, his breath caught in his throat. Another crack of wood, closer this time. They weren't alone anymore. Nell motioned for him to stay low, her movements slow and deliberate. Jonas gripped his rifle, trying to steady his trembling hands. The clearing was lit by a pale wash of moonlight, but beyond it the trees were nothing but shifting shadows. A voice drifted through the dark. "Reed, I know you're out here, boy." Jonas felt his blood run cold. "McGraw, you can't hide from me." The outlaw's voice was calm, almost mocking. "You and that woman, though you can run till your legs give out, but this forest won't save you." Nell's hand brushed Jonas's arm, grounding him. She leaned close, her breath warm against his. "Here. We move on my signal," she whispered. He nodded, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack his ribs. A desperate escape shadows flickered between the trees, lantern lights swinging in the hands of men. They were close now, less than 100 yards away, spreading out in a slow, methodical search. Jonas could see their breath in the moonlight, hear the crunch of their boots in the snow. Nell squeezed his arm. Once. Twice. On the third squeeze, they bolted. The forest erupted with shouts and gunfire as they tore through the trees, snow spraying beneath their boots. Jonas ducked low as bullets splintered bark overhead, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Nell moved like a predator, weaving through the shadows, leading him deeper into the wilderness with an uncanny sense of direction. A shot rang out behind them, and Jonas felt a searing pain graze his shoulder. He stumbled, nearly falling, but Nell yanked him forward with surprising strength. "Keep running," she barked. Adrenaline surged through him, drowning out the pain. They pushed harder, their legs burning, the forest blurring into a whirlwind of snow and darkness. And then suddenly, the ground disappeared beneath their feet. Cliffhanger. The ravine. Jonas tumbled forward, his stomach lurching as he realized they were on the edge of a ravine. He managed to stop himself just short of the drop, snow cascading over the edge into darkness. Nell skidded to a halt beside him, her face pale in the moonlight. Behind them, McGraw's men were closing in, their shouts growing louder, their lanterns bobbing like ghostly orbs through the trees. Nell glanced at Jonas, her chest heaving. "We jump," she said. Jonas's eyes widened. "Are you insane? We don't even know how far down it goes." "Better than a bullet in your back," she growled. The sound of voices grew louder. They had seconds to decide. Jonas met her eyes, saw the steel there, and something in him hardened. "Together," he said. She grabbed his hand, and with one last breath they leapt into the darkness.